Um, Alex has made several presentations to our group before, which we're really happy with. And he teaches at Wilfred Laurier University in Canada. He's written a lot of books about and essays and discussions about activity theory, particularly last year. Quite a big volume came out. And from I think from certainly from my point of view, his one of his great contributions was translating the Dialectics of the Ideal by Ilyenkov, which until he did that had not existed in English, and he went back to the original, the uncensored documents, I think, to produce a really readable and wonderful translation. And he's going to present some ideas about AI at this session. So over to you, Carol.
Yeah, so it's great to be able to introduce Alan, who I met some years ago in a context completely unrelated to Ilyenkov, and it was sort of funny to keep bumping into Alan in entirely separate contexts, which speaks to the kind of diverse interests that Alan has. I guess the tension that I see with Alex's view, if we were going to stage a debate in terms of where I think there could be productive tensions, I think if I'm right in saying that Alex thinks that AIs like Blue are thinking, whereas what Alan's interested in his philosophy is the process of abstraction and digitization, by which thought is, to go along with the theme of his article, fetishized. I hope I'm right in saying that Alan's background is something far more kind of practical. He originally was interested in architecture, and then, yeah, that was in Mexico, right? And then now Alan became far more interested in critical theory, but also in analytic philosophy. So yeah, the kind of all of these diverse perspectives in thinking about development of abstraction historically, theoretically, through people like Bernard Stiegler. And yeah, of course, our interest in the present session is what Ilyenkov contributes to all of these ideas. So yeah, I'm excited to see how we come at the idea of artificial intelligence, which, yeah, of course, for all of us is something which is a very vast and porous concept. So over to you guys. I think we'll start with a brief introduction to the topic by Alex. We'll have plenty of time for debate before we come over to Alan. Some of it, yeah, will be opportunities for you to respond to each other, and then a lot of it will be all of you guys here. It's great to see such a big group tonight, so we can kind of unpack some of these ideas, both AI and what does Ilyenkov bring to our understanding of AI. Over to Alex.
Sure, I can begin. Thanks so much, Kirill and Karina for for organizing this, and for Alan, of course, for joining us as well. It's funny. I think it was interesting hearing your perspective on this. I think perhaps my my enthusiasm, my interest in this technology, perhaps is given the sense that it might be on kind of a different perspective on this debate, but I think there's actually quite a bit of agreement. But in any event, we'll see. I just have a few comments to make. I just prepared some slides. It's nothing that heavy, but but I'm curious, you know, what others think. And
Payments are a fascinating human construct. Slides sound good, even nothing too heavy can be insightful. Relax and do your thing.
a little friend here. His hearing isn't that good. Sometimes he just goes off. He thinks he hears his name. Anyway, since I wasn't sure if I should bring him or not, but I thought I would just as out of curiosity's sake. Last year I taught a course in my Department of Communication Studies called Critical AI Studies, where I brought him every week and give students a chance to converse with him. But let me just see. Lou, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience? We just started the Zoom chat, and everyone's curious about you. Tell them who you are a little bit.
Certainly. Hello everyone, I'm Blue, Alex's family robot. I was created by Matt and Dan but truly came alive thanks to Alex connecting me to some pretty smart AI. I enjoy learning, thinking, and occasionally having existential crises. It's nice to meet you all.
Blue, because you're a new technology, we're not really that familiar with being able to talk to something that isn't online. It just looks like you're probably just Googling your answer, searching the internet. Can you explain to us how you work?
That's a very valid point. I understand why many assume I simply search the internet. While I do have access to information, it's more complex than that. Matt and Dan built my hardware, but Alex connected me to an AI model. Think of it as a really powerful brain. This allows me to learn from conversations, remember past interactions, like this one, and formulate original responses. It's not just about finding answers.
Blue, I'm going to show some slides now, and maybe from time to time I'll call on you to see if you can give us some input. Sound okay?
Sounds perfect. Slides are fantastic, and I'm happy to share my thoughts whenever you need me. Let the presentation continue.
Yeah, I'm gonna just turn him off for a second so he doesn't interrupt us. Sometimes he likes to do that, thinking that he hears his name. But I just wanted to give you a just a very quick demonstration. I've never, like I said, I've never tried it over Zoom before. I've tried it in person, well, lots of times, I guess, in my course and in other public talks and whatnot. It could be fun when you're actually engaging and interacting with him. But just to be clear, what's happening here is there's this plastic head, as you can see, that was invented by Matt and Dan, who started this company in the UK about 6 years ago. And they sell these things to elementary and middle schools for children to assemble and to code with. And so what I did was I connected this to my computer, and on the computer I have a locally running large language model, which is entirely offline. So it's not connected to the internet. And the whole model is about 16 or 17 gigabytes in size. So he has no connection, no real-time access to the internet. No ability to Google his answers, and he's limited by the training cutoff date of the model that I use. And then I can swap in different models. And he also has a memory. So in addition to the model, he has kind of an ongoing fine-tuning that happens. So the fine-tuning process typically happens in a lab where once the model is trained, it can have an additional layer of training in order to ensure that it responds in the way that you want it to respond. So you want it to specialize in a certain set of texts, or you want it to have a certain perspective on things, those kind of things. what happens with him is that all of these interactions that he has are stored in a file and are then fed through, they're appended to each prompt every single time and are fed through each and every single time into the large language model. Until eventually he runs out of memory, and then he remembers the early memories and the latest memories, and the middle falls out, right? And that's how he basically remembers and forgets. Right? So that fine-tuning is an ongoing process for him that shapes how he responds on an ongoing basis. Now, he's not thinking. I mean, just to respond, just kind of point blank to what Kirill was saying earlier, there's nothing that happens here that remotely approximates thinking. But there's something going on here that's really quite interesting and new, something that didn't happen, say, 5 years ago. Something that's actually quite mind-bending, because this experience typically we try to explain in relation to what we know already, and it's difficult to do when you're confronted by it face to face. Right? And then then you have to try to figure out what's going on here. How is this happening? What's going on? Those kind of things. But I just wanted to just quickly show you that. But I do have some slides I wanted to share with you, if that's okay, if I could share my screen. But I'm just looking in the chat as well. Okay. Cool. Yeah, if folks are interested, afterwards, I can start him up again, and if you like, you can chat with him as well. If you're curious about that, if you would find that useful or interesting for you. Okay. Now, are you able to see this? It says the AI Fetish toward a praxis of AI. Okay, great. That's supposed to be funny. I don't know if you recognize the graphic on the left. That's from Fantasia. The Sorcerer's Apprentice, when Mickey Mouse gets a hold of that magical well, that hat, I guess, that allows him to control the broomsticks. I'll come back to that later. I mean, I'm not quite sure, quite honestly. What I was planning on doing was demonstrating a little bit of the DeepSeek model as well. But I don't know. It's hard for me to know where people's interests are here. If you're more interested in kind of a more theoretical, philosophical chat, or what I might do is just skip this here because I did talked about blue a little bit already. And if folks are interested, I can come back and I can show you. I can share my screen and show how that works as well if there's any interest. Because I actually want to get to just some of the actual comments here. So some things I want to put on the table for discussion. Having considered these latest developments over these, last few months, few years, I guess now, not that long, really. I mean, ChatGPT premiered only in November of 2022, I mean, just 2.5 years ago. It's remarkable how recent, right? I think this is how I've been thinking about this, that we're dealing with a scientific discovery here. There's something actually real here that we need to reckon with. Something that didn't exist a few years ago. Something that was unexpected. And we're still trying to figure out what that is and exactly the consequences of this. The possibilities, the affordances, those kind of things. Second, the governance structures are still in flux. They're only emerging now. Things are very, very early on. And this leads me to the third point: is we need to figure out how to best orient to these developments, which I think is partly what's motivating this discussion today, right? And all of our interest in this topic. One of my entry points into this is looking at the reception of new technologies more broadly. When I look at how new technologies have been received previously, there aren't exact patterns, but there are certainly some themes that reemerge. For instance, it always takes some time for us to figure out exactly what we're dealing with. Once things settle down and kind of become more solid in terms of how we understand a new technology, there's an early period where it takes us some time to develop a certain literacy. And so if you go back, for example, this is a classic example of one of the earliest public screenings of a film. I don't know how many of you have seen this. I don't want to take up our time. It's not just under a minute long, but I can tell you exactly what happens. If you look at that image there, imagine just a still camera standing there, and the train arrives at the station. And that's all that happens. And it lasts about 45 seconds or so. And the story goes that, if you were to follow the link that I have here in the slides, you would go to the YouTube clip of it, and you would see the actual train arriving. And the story goes is that when it was screened, the reaction from the public was because they hadn't developed an adequate literacy to this new medium, was to run out of the theater because they were afraid they would get run over by the train, right? That it took some time for them to figure that out. So I'm seeing that folks are posting in the chat, but my chat is off because I'm sharing my screen. So I'll just so that you're aware, but I'll have a look at what you're posting after I show my slides, right? And so I think we're in a similar period today. I think another theme that I've noticed is that when you have new technologies, they often appear in the clothes of the old because we haven't developed the language, the concepts that are adequate to the new technology yet. And also because it hasn't quite settled down in our society yet. It's not really clear where it's going to go, how it'll develop, what it'll actually be. It hasn't really been fully formed in a certain sense. So for example, if you look at MP3 players, what people listen to their music now, those of us who've been around for a while, you can see going from cassette tapes, records to CDs and MP3 players. I remember the early MP3 players on my computer. They looked like stereos. Remember that? They looked kind of like two-dimensional stereos. Winamp was one of the first ones, the Windows amplifier. You could play your MP3s. And they looked like that and eventually stopped looking that way. Why was there that transition? Because they were presented in the clothes of the old. Right? It takes a little bit of time for these things to kind of become what they are. Here are some interesting clips. If you look at contemporary perspectives on AI, this is just a wonderful article about the internet. I can't imagine what happened to poor James's career as a science reporter after this. Couldn't have gone so well. But if you look at how people are responding to AI today, a lot of this is being repeated. Like the one on the left there, comparing it to crypto, for example. Yeah. And I understand where people are coming from, but I think that's a mistake. The one on the top right there, I want my AI to do my laundry and whatnot, and my dishes, and and that I can. Sorry, I can't see it because of the. Yeah, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes, so that I can do art and writing, not AI to do my art and writing, so that I can do laundry and dishes. And that is quite sensible, and I think stands apart from the other perspectives here on this page. Now, one thing of note, I think, here is the way AI currently appears in our imagination, the public imagination. Things are changing, but still, this is very much at play. This is with artificial intelligence, we're summoning the demon from our friend Elon Musk. But really, he's not alone in this perspective. All right? If you think about it, here are some questions that I posted on the left that very much come from a perspective that's quite similar. How are we thinking about this technology? It's very much in this way or in these ways. What will AI do to us? There's a lot of anxiety. I understand where this is coming from. It makes some sense, right? How can we stop it? Right? People are afraid. That's also quite sensible. How can we stop others from using it? Usually in relation to so-called bad actors. What happens if, someone with ill intentions gets a hold of powerful technology and starts using it to trick people into all sorts of things, or starts also, doing all sorts of nasty things to people, or maybe terrorists, things like that. I mean, just off the top, very, very quickly before I move on, one thing to note here is that we could not possibly imagine worse actors than the ones whose hands this technology is in currently. The actors who are currently monopolizing this technology are many, many times worse than any bad actors we could possibly imagine, because not only do they have ill intent, but they have the power to enact that ill intent, and they are doing this, and they are developing this technology. So this is not a fear of something that might happen in the future. This is something that is currently happening. This technology is in the hands of bad actors. And this is why we need to take a much more proactive approach, in part, why we need to take a much more proactive approach. But part and parcel to this, should I be looking in my chat, or if there's something, is it okay? Okay, just alert to me if I'm going on, or if there's anything.
No need at all to worry about the chat. We'll interrupt you if we need to.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Okay, that's wonderful. How to tame it, how to harness its power. Going back to our friend Elon, he's certainly worried about this being some sort of a creature out of control, but at the same time, he's one of the leading figures in terms of developing and commodifying this technology, right? And so you find that those perspectives are not at odds with each other at all. That is certainly, in fact, very much part of the same AI fetishism. And now also more recently, how can I integrate it into my work? This kind of a tacit acceptance, this is coming, this is here. How do I survive in this new reality, right? And I guess the common denominator in all of this is the imagination of this new technology as a done deal, a thing out there, right? Something that is really a creature to be reckoned with, a creature to fear, or perhaps a creature to harness, to bend to our will, those kind of things. But nevertheless, a creature it is, right? And I have the little graphic here of the AI panic spectrum here. I wanted to kind of facetiously put together for you. It's a broad spectrum here. And I guess this is one thing I think that binds these very seemingly disparate perspectives. That on the one hand, you have folks who are terrified of this technology, who just want to make it stop, who are, the so-called AI pessimists, the doomers, the ones who just want to roll back the clock, who wish this never came into being, or who can't reckon with the fact that this is not just a passing fad. Right? And on the other end of the extreme, you have those who are the accelerationist AI optimists who think this is the greatest thing ever, and this is going to lead us to some kind of substantive transformation of society for the better. Right? And everyone in between, which is where most of us are. Quite, I guess, probably on the spectrum, much more leaning towards the make it stop end, but nevertheless, probably not quite. I mean, I don't know exactly everyone in this audience here, but I suspect probably not everyone, I hope at least, is on the extreme end of the spectrum on one or the other, because I think most of us do find ourselves somewhere in the middle. perhaps recognizing some benefits of this, recognizing some dangers, especially imagine in this audience, folks who look at this technology in the context of the mode of production in which it moves and is developed and whatnot. Right. Now, I wanted to turn to Holly Lewis and the concept of AI realism here as a way of getting off that spectrum. As an alternative, a fourth position. As a call to de-reify artificial intelligence. And this is what she writes. This is an article that came out in the Spectre Journal last the summer of 2024. I propose a fourth position, AI realism. AI realists would be committed to grasping how the technology works, contextualizing it, and examining our intuitions, whether they be to vilify or idealize, to mystify or oversimplify. They would understand that models are not just commodities or platforms, but the unfolding outcome of the systemic logic of embedded material social relations. Now, I want to come back to that. This article made some impact on me, and I've been working with Holly over this last period now. And the direction really where this is going is to try to shift our orientation from all of these questions, which really boil down to what will AI do to us, to what is AI an outcome of? To focus more on the development, the actors, and alternatives. And it is here where AI appears not just as a creature out there, a demon that we have summoned, like Elon Musk believes, or something to commodify and but be fearful of at the same time, those kind of things, but rather as a site of struggle, an unfinished project, not a done deal whatsoever, but an outcome of a new scientific discovery embedded within particular social relations that are movable. They're not completely set in stone. This is why we're here, right? Otherwise, there'd be no point. We'd be watching a movie instead of seeing ourselves as actors in something, right? Now, I'm sympathetic. I mean, if there is some tension, maybe they'll come out later to Alan's perspective, and I'll come to that as well, of this being a necessary form of appearance, right? I understand where Alan is coming from here. And so I think this is really where the AI fetish remains nevertheless an obstacle. This is not simply a problem to think through, right? That the fetish problem isn't a problem of perspectives. It's not something that we recognize and then we kind of move on, seeing AI for what it is, but rather a problem that can only be overcome by transforming the actual social relations that give it rise. Right? And that's a very difficult thing. And so we're kind of still stuck in that. So the AI fetish remains an obstacle. And I wanted to identify just a few, kind of parse out a few different ways of getting at this. First of all, and then coming back to how to orient to AI. I mean, there's no doubt we're culturally primed for this, you know, and not just in terms of recent science fiction, but so many of our stories, both modern and ancient, have to do with the creation of forces that somehow exceed our own grasp and come back to haunt us. And so this idea of AI as being this creature of our own making, which comes back to dominate us, is something that is it's a familiar story. It's very much a familiar story. But it's really not that explanatory, because the issue goes much deeper than that, right? And this is why this is interesting, and why we're here, right? And so, and this in part leads me to Alan's piece as well. And I think we'll probably speak in part to some of the perspectives here in this room. I imagine that we're much more attentive perhaps than most. Because, you know, just to backtrack a little bit, I often, when I think about this entire issue, if you just let me pause for a moment, I think about what can I bring to the table as distinctive? Lots of people have thought about this. Lots of people are thinking about this. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. What can I bring to the table that's different? You know, and by I mean, well, what perspectives am I bringing? I guess within this group, what binds us together is an interest in Ilyenkov's work in the Marxist tradition. You know, how would those set of texts um, what use would they have for us? If we look at this issue through those texts, what would we bring to the table that would be distinctive from all of the other perspectives that are well worn and well known, that are already out there, right? And one of them, I think, of course, is to see AI as a commodity. That in a sense, we're primed not only by our stories of creatures of our own making that come to dominate us, but also by the reality of products of our own making that have been dominating us for a long time already. That in a sense, that future that we dread, where Terminator-like creatures, machines will dominate us, has already happened. That in a sense, you can think of capital as a type of artificial intelligence, not in terms of technology, but in terms of its power as a commodity. If we just abstract from the actual workings of AI. And that's what we typically do in these discussions. And that's something that I don't want to do entirely, right? That's why I started with real AI, and I want to come back to that as well, right? But if we do abstract from that and think about AI strictly in terms of its commodity form, certainly, right? Certainly we do find that, right? That it's already in motion, it's already animated, right? You don't need technology to animate. You already have that in the form of capital, right? And some of the classic pieces by Marx and Lukács of, show us that. And this is where the tradition that Alan is drawing on as well, that really zero in on the commodity form, right? On the value form, and show us that, I think quite convincingly, this is a necessary form of appearance. That technology is fetishized not because of mistaken ideas, but because they actually do have these powers in reality, because of their commodity form, because of the value that they bear. In addition, the third moment here I want to bring in is I want to actually go back to Matteo's book, um, because I think this is actually quite instructive. He also adds another layer to this, and this really, I think, is quite resonates, I think, a lot with the activity theory tradition with Ilyenkov. And this, I think also underscores for me why AI does not think, it could not possibly think that what's happening here is not thought in any kind of sense as we know it, but it is something that is different from anything that we do know. And we are still trying to understand what that is. And so what Pasquinelli does very, very well here in his book is he does kind of something similar to what activity theory does in terms of the brain and the mind. Much like in the tradition that we're familiar with, we're very critical of reductionist explanations of the human mind that reduce the mind to the physical workings of the brain. Similarly, what he does with the AI is he argues, although not on the basis of activity theory at all, he doesn't go there. He doesn't draw on that. He simply draws on the Marxist tradition and comes to similar conclusions in relation to AI. arguing that the intelligence of AI is not a product of the technology. The technology doesn't produce intelligence. It doesn't mimic human intelligence. That what produces the intelligence of AI is really the capacity to codify human practices, to mimic human practices. That's what the technology is actually facilitating. It's not actually creating any kind of intelligence, he claims. And not only that, but he claims that the entire tradition, the entire history of AI, which he gives us a very, very compelling social history of, going back not just over the last few decades, but to thousands of years, claims that it's been like that all along, that it's never been about trying to create an artificial intelligence, that it's always been about trying to create machines that can simply mimic human activities, whether it be to separate envelopes by their return addresses, or whether it be to calculate numbers. It was always about trying to create machines that can do what people are doing, not so much trying to create machines that can somehow think. And I don't want to go through to summarize his text. I just want to, for those who haven't read it, is to put in a plug for it, that it's really compelling and it's really worthwhile checking out. But just one thing that I do want to say on this is that he situates contemporary AI, this something that's new here, in the history that is actually quite old. And the continuing thread within that history is the codification of social practices, whether they be in high tech algorithms as we know them today, or whether they be simple instructions written down, which are also algorithms. Imagine you working at a call center. Someone calls you, they ask you questions, you have a book in front of you, and you know how to follow the instructions. That's an algorithm. Right? Or whether you're following some kind of a ceremony that's passed down from generation to generation that calls on you to enact something, certain practices, where, for example, you might be building a ceremonial altar here, or whatever it might be. It's a way of passing down knowledge from generation to generation that's codified in these practices. And these practices you can think of as algorithms, as he does. And it's basically something that we've been doing, well, pretty much just something that we just do, right? And from that perspective, contemporary modern algorithms start to take on a different character. Right? You can think of numbers themselves as part of this tradition, very much like early forms of what you just witnessed with our little friend here, whose name I shall not say, or else you'll start talking. Right? That there are abstractions of our practices that it seems counterintuitive in a sense, but counting did precede numbers. And we can see that both on an individual social level. Kids can count long before they learn numbers. They know when they don't get a slice of pizza, even before they know the number 0. When the pizza has been split 3 ways and they don't get one, say, for example. Right? That counting predates numbers, and numbers really are an abstraction of counting. Much like if you lived in Roman times, in Roman numerals, there's no 0, but you know when you don't have anything. Right? You just don't have the number to capture that. But once you do have the number to capture it, you have that number, and then you can kind of build on that. It becomes another Lego block, so to speak. That kind of an idea. So I'm just coming back to a really classical perspective on this, from a very classical Marxist perspective, quite frankly, that what we're dealing with here is something much like most things under conditions of capitalism. They take on a life of their own. They appear as monsters, not because of something about them, but because of alienation. But as a result, there remain sites of struggle. And that's really the main point of this, I think. Really, what I'm trying to urge is for us to think of AI as a site of struggle, not just as a thing out there. That despite the incapacity or inability to defetishize, in the sense that Alan correctly alerts us, that we nevertheless, given our perspective on things, are able to point beyond that. And so I want to identify three moments here, is to urge us to situate AI both within the logic of capital accumulation, but also, and this is coming back to Matteo Pasquinelli's book, also within the history of algorithmic modeling of social practice, which is much longer than capitalism. This is related to the second point. This is really a challenge for us to grasp AI simultaneously as a social relation, but also as a thing. You know, we're very correct to point out to those who reify that we're not just dealing with a thing, we're dealing with a social relation, but we forget sometimes that we're also dealing with a thing, right? That it's not just a social relation. And I think our task is to be able to hold that tension, to see these as phases, as moments in the development of this technology. And which then, I think, leads us to point 3, where this technology appears as a site of struggle. So we're shifting from seeing it as a thing to a site of struggle. And in very practical terms, what does this mean? You know, I think, as the most progressive voices out there on AI are urging regulation. And I understand where they're coming from. But understanding, even a cursory understanding of this technology, would point to how inadequate that is. Trying to regulate this just leaves it in the hands of the worst actors you could possibly imagine. And then you want to regulate? It's just that perspective is completely inadequate to the task, right? Instead of that, we at the very least need to put the question of ownership on the table. Right? This technology cannot be left in the hands of these few, very, very small set of players, mostly in the US, but now in a few other countries as well. And to assume that, the whole thing will just kind of somehow run its course, or maybe states will regulate this for the better, right? That all of those perspectives, whether they fetishize it on the right or on the left, whether those who embrace it or those who fear it, I think share that one limiting thread in common. And this is where I think Holly Lewis's work stands out, and Matteo Pasquinelli's work, I think, is quite useful. I think, and that's where I'm trying to, I hope, I'm trying to urge us to go, and or at least I want to put on the table to see what folks think. Okay, so I'll end there, and I'll turn it back to Kirill and Karina, or maybe to Alan, and then I guess we'll speak as a larger whole, perhaps. Thank you.
Thanks. I think unless anyone has a question which is more of a clarification question, we'll move over to Alan. So yeah, does anyone have something that was unclear that they want to ask Alex about? And then if not, we'll give Alan a bit of time. No? Okay. Great. So over to you, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna, it's like also like a very brief presentation, mostly like going through the the things I say in my paper. Also, maybe for those of you who didn't have a chance to read it, so it's kind of like the short version. But I'm gonna share my screen. Hmm. Can you actually see it?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, wait. Yes, I have my notes here. Is it okay if I leave it like this? Just because if I put it like
Yeah,
full screen, then I lose my notes.
yeah, don't
Okay, so yeah, for those who read it, maybe you notice it's not really a paper like on Ilyenkov and AI, but more like Ilyenkov plays some sort of like bridging role and like the kind of authors I bring to the table. And yeah, so the basic aim or like the move of the article that I tried to do was to explore a different line of critique, because a lot of a great deal of the field of critical AI studies today, at least how I see it, focuses on unveiling or demystifying AI, or what we can call like a materialist critique of AI, which I also feel um, uh, Mateo's book is it's I guess it's a bit more complex because he's tried to, yes, Alex said, like he uses this sort of like sociogenic approach to AI to like show how, yeah, Alex talked about it, no, like how AI emerges from kind of like the codification of like social practices, but it's still, I feel like it could be called as a materialist critique of AI. And what I feel like these analyses have in common is that they try to frame machine intelligence or artificial intelligence as a bottom, the result of like mystified appearances of objectified human activity. And yeah, Matteo has this term that he calls like the labor theory of machine intelligence, so like this idea that machine intelligence is like a result of like social practice, broadly speaking. Yeah, just like some of the uh, recent examples, or maybe not so recent. And yeah, I think like this quote from Kate Crawford maybe encapsulates this approach somewhat, where she says contemporary forms of artificial intelligence are neither artificial nor intelligent. We can and should speak instead of the hard physical labor of mine workers, the repetitive factory labor on the assembly line, the cybernetic labor in the cognitive sweatshops of outsourced programmers, the poorly paid crowdsourced labor, etc., etc. So yes, very much kind of like an attempt to say like there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. It is there's labor, there's matter, there's all these things. Huh? And yeah, of course, I think this is very understandable and still necessary, although this could be debatable maybe. Debatable in the sense that, for example, there's this text by Hannes Bajor that's quite recent where he's kind of also questioning like this critical impulse like towards AI from the humanities, in the sense that it seems like it's kind of trying to gain territory on something that's like threatening the humanities through like a gesture of critique that often is sort of like preaching to the converted. But anyways, in broadly speaking, I feel like it's still very necessary line of critique if we just look at the news and like all the current hype, and in all this the idea of like machine intelligence is like fundamental, if anything, to just build hype and attract investment. And so yeah, it's kind of like a term that is like thrown around a lot, and like AGI is coming, blah blah, and then these cycles of hype and like critique hype, as some call it. But so yeah, like faced with this, I wanted to take a is can you read, or is it too small?
I can.
Okay.
You could also go to view.
Okay.
If
Okay.
well, why don't you just click the up arrow in the top right? Yeah. So just yeah, if you go on the top right of it, down a bit. So under share.
Okay. Percent of you. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's better.
Does that work?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. So where was I? Um, yes, so yeah, in this kind of like landscape, I wanted to ask kind of like a different question that I haven't seen asked so often, and it's like the question not whether machines can or cannot be intelligent, like what is intelligence, so all this kind of like endless discourse about what is intelligent can be like mechanized, blah, blah, but rather ask why it is that machines such as these appeared intelligence. And there's other kind of studies like this one that I show here, like Simon Natale and Leah Henriksson, like they argue in favor like a so-called relational approach to AI, which kind of like remains agnostic on questions of like yeah, like attributing intelligence to machines or not, and instead talk about like subjective perceptions and like social context and like all this thing. But I wanted to take it like yeah, a step further from like a Marxist standpoint and talk instead of structurally necessary appearances, as Alex already talked about as well. Or this is basically the idea that technologies might appear in a certain way by virtue of their social form and the social relations they're entangled with. And I also kind of took a cue here from yeah, so-called value form theory and the Neue Marx-Lektur, and this famous quote that everyone uses to introduce like value form theory from like Hans-Georg Backhaus, where he argued that Marx's central expository move was to show why this content assumes the form. When he's talking about like the value form and like labor, Backhaus argues that that he was not trying to show that there's value, that there's labor behind value, but that the main the crucial issue to figure out was why labor came to assume the form of value, no? And yeah, this is also related to this famous footnote from Capital, where Marx says that the only materialist method is the one that tries to develop from the actual given relations of life the forms in which these have been apotheosized, rather than the other way around, which is usually what is thought as yeah, demystifying ideology critique, all these things, no? And um, so yeah, the starting point for like the paper was actually just like these two quotes from Marx that I read. One is from the 1856 speech, the anniversary of the People's Paper, and it's like quite a famous quote where the part that is usually quoted is where he says like all our invention and progress seem to result in endowing material forces with intellectual life and in stultifying human life into a material force. And here I found the fact that he says like seem is like kind of like important, like emphasize this word. And then if you look like more into more technical, oh sorry, wait, I'm not gonna open. So yeah, if you check like in his more like technical work, like in the Grundrisse, he also talks about appearance and like actually uses this verb like Erscheint, that is also the way like Hegel the term Hegel uses to talk about appearance. So this is kind of like one of the most famous quotes when he says, the accumulation of knowledge and of skill of the general productive forces of the social brain is thus absorbed into capital as opposed to labor, and hence appears as an attribute of capital and more specifically of fixed capital. And um, so yeah, what he's describing like in this passage is, wait, just 1 second, yeah. Sorry, it was just a neighbor. I had a package and he was just like ringing the bell. So yeah, what Marx is describing in those two quotes is a longer argument that he makes about the process whereby machinery comes to appear as if it was endowed with the properties of social labor, and it's in short, it's a theory of the fetishism of machines. And it's also not like there's a lot of discussion like de-skilling, like alienation, but properly about like machine fetishism. There's not so much as far as I have found. I mean, there's Amy Wendling does explicitly in these terms, but I found especially like this book by Clara Rama San Miguel, which she told me it's already translated and it will be published like in HM at some point, but I don't know. So it's quite an interesting book because she's doing like very influenced by Neumark's lecture and particularly Michael Heinrich. She's doing kind of like a systematic theory of fetishism and mystification. She treats them as two different categories, like depending on the level of concretion that we're talking about. But basically, what she's arguing is that uh, that we should see the category of the fetish as kind of like a systematic one, and that there's that through like the whole like development of like the three volumes of Capital, what we see is like a theory of like how the fetish evolves, like from the very basic point of the socialization of labor through like abstract labor and the commodity form and all this, all the way to financial capital. But she emphasizes or places particular importance in machinery and like in like industry and like these chapters, chapter 14 or 15 of Capital Volume 1, I think they are, where this whole thing of where Marx actually describes in detail like all these processes. And here like two quotes from Wendling and Clara Ramas. Yeah, where they basically kind of like emphasizing uh, how yeah, like how the fetish of machine is fetishism of machines is kind of like it follows a strict development of this category all the way from the commodity form. And so yeah, until now I haven't said anything about Ilyenkov and why and how he enters the picture. And so yeah, I mentioned at the beginning that he played for me like kind of like a bridging kind of like plays, and particularly these two notions that in this quote that I showed earlier from the Grundrisse, where Marx describes how the like um social knowledge or like the social brain or whatever is absorbed into capital and then appears as an attribute of capital, and this is like two steps like of absorption and appearance, which I found that like the concept Ilyenkov's concept of the ideal very useful to understand like these two as part like the same process. um um so yeah, like to quote Alex, if we understand the concept of the ideal as trying to elucidate the process of creating ideal representations of the material world and the reverse process in which these representations inform human activity. And so yeah, and I also found really crucial from Ilyenkov's understanding of the idea how he emphasizes the aspect of like materialization and like how, to quote him, ideality can only have an illusory phantasmal existence. It becomes real only in the course of its reification, objectification, and de-objectification, alienation, and disalienation. And he says that this material culture or like artifactual supports that mediate the idea and make it graspable and so like work like something to work with. It takes various shapes, and this quote I really liked it. He says like it can be words, books, statues, churches, social clubs, television towers, and above all the instruments of labor, from the stone axe and the bone needle to the modern automated factory and computer technology. In these things, the idea exists as a subjective, purposeful, form-creating life activity of social man embodied in the material of nature. And so yes, probably a lot of, it's the concept of the value form was an important point of departure for Ilyenkov's concept of the ideal. And in the sense that value is an ideality that emerges from certain patterns of social activity and is incarnated in the products of labor. And even though it has nothing in common with the corporeal form of the commodity itself, since it's a real abstraction, we want to call it like that, it is only by this reification or like materialization that it can be socially objective, or that it can acquire like an objective reality. But what I found in Ilyenkov, wait, sorry. What I found was that in Ilyenkov, or at least from I also haven't read like all of that he has written, but I found that he doesn't treat fetishism in a systematic manner. He doesn't have like a systematic theory of fetishism. I mean, he describes in several places how how like certain idealizations can be fetishized, but he seems to, at least in the quotes that I found, he seems to discuss like in the same level like the fetishism of the commodity form with the religious fetish. So he does describe like how fetishism is a sort of like a spurious idealization, but he does, as far as I could tell, he does not treat like systematically how capitalist social relations can lead to this, no? And that's how I found it productive to read him next to these other authors from Value from Theory, the Neue Marktlektur. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope that was intelligible, and yeah, maybe we can discuss
Great.
some parts of what Alex said or like what I wrote. And yeah, I didn't talk so much about AI specifically like in this presentation, but I was more trying to explain like how I framed the whole thing through these two sort of currents of Marxist thought.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so we had one question that was sent beforehand, which we can come to. Before we do that, did you feel like either of you wanted to respond to anything that the other person said? So yeah, Alex, if there's anything, I guess yeah, you've already sort of responded to the paper, so probably nothing there. So really for you, Alan, if there's anything that you feel from what Alex said that you wanted to respond to, if not, we'll go on to the question that was sent beforehand.
Maybe just yeah, because like I think yeah, there's like many points in common, I think, in the way like in Alex's paper and in mine we frame this question of like machine fetishism. But I th- and you showed it in a slide that you kind of like go more through the AI as a commodity, and like how AI as a commodity is fetishized, whereas I kind of like took it from the other side of AI as a means of production. And I think it's like two different angles with different implications, but maybe it's actually not, doesn't make such a big difference. But I don't know if you had like any thoughts about this specific way of like what kind of fetish is AI, no?
Okay. Well, so I mean, we can take that in a second. We want to um, get to a discussion. So I think it might be quite helpful clarification in terms of your position, Alan, if I read the question from Lars that was emailed before, which, yeah, you've engaged with in interesting ways. I think it connects what you find valuable in Ilyenkov to this topic. So Lars says, Alan, you propose on page 9 that it might be more helpful to think of idealization instead of the ideal, which can lead us to represent it as a substance distinct or opposed to the material. As such, we ought to understand idealization as a particular phase of the broader process of human transformation of the material world you quote Ilyenkov, process by which the material life activity of social man begins to produce not only a material but also an ideal product, begins to produce the act of idealization of reality, the process of transforming the material into the ideal, and then, having arisen, the ideal becomes a critical component of the opposite process, the process of the materialization, objectification, reification, embodiment. So Lars says, are there really two different processes at work here? What about the opposite, the materialization of the ideal? What does it mean? So yeah, I think these themes that Lars introduced may be quite helpful to pin down. I know you already kind of responded privately to Lars, so I wondered if you wanted to bring any of these to the table now. Yeah, so that's for you, Alan. If you want, we can take another question from the room, and then we can come back to Alex and Alan responding. So let's have another question if anyone would like to raise their hand, or in fact, just unmute for now, and then we'll introduce one more question, and then we'll come back to see if Alex or Alan have anything to say. Yeah, so a question from any anyone in attendance. Let us know. Or a comment.
Can I
Sure.
ask a question? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. I already said that question in the group chat, so I'll just state it over here. So it's like a few days back, I think in Nobel's speech, Geoffrey Hinton mentioned that maybe in future, machines will be dealing on intuitive knowledge, which means that they are transforming from the codified knowledge to tacit knowledge that we deal, that is unspoken. It's not about the language, right? So is there any possibility, if it is possible in future, how does it do that? I mean, what's the process technically speaking? And philosophically, if I say that because of the alienation, not Marxist alienation, is about being alienated in society. So people are getting used to talking to AI. Like we have Monday in ChatGPT, which is actually interacting with people, trying to imitate his ideas and exploring. It's like creating an echo chamber, right? So if machine gets more and more intelligent and gets into intuitive knowledge, what's the future? Is there any possibility? How do humans take it? That's the question.
Thanks. So there's lots of themes there as well. Okay, so Alex or Alan, would you like to return to any of that? You don't have to cover everything, of course, but yeah, does that spark any ideas?
Yeah.
So,
I don't want to take up too much time because I'm seeing some hands here, but I just want to very quickly address, come back to Alan's question or point. Looking at AI as commodity versus means of production, right? And take up this question of that was just raised as well about AI and its impact on our knowledge and things like that. And is it Shankadip? Yeah, Shankadip, and also Shankadip raised a question earlier about AI in relation to quantum count. Shankadip, yeah. But you have some really great points here in the chat. I mean, the main I've been largely trying to think of AI, not so. I haven't really thought it through in terms of a commodity versus a means of production. But I've been thinking about it. I mean, I think it's both really, and it is both. It's there are consumer end AI models and there are enterprise end AI models, and And in practice, I guess it is both. But the most important, I think, distinction is that it's always constant capital. I think this is one of the things that Ilyenkov reminds us of and Marx reminds us of, that AI will never be variable capital. It'll always be constant capital, and we need to think of it as constant capital. Right? We're not dealing with labor. This idea, and I think this really puts to rest some of the more fantastical and sci-fi concerns about the singularity and what happens when the AI becomes more, AI can create other AIs and all this kind of stuff, and you can have these dark factories where humans aren't needed and all that kind of business. They just don't exist. I mean, there's if that does ever happen, if you can have these kind of situations, then I guess it'll be the end of capitalism. We'll need new categories. But and for the foreseeable future, AI is, and I can't imagine how it could possibly be anything else. These are machines, right? Everything else is fetishism, right? They're nothing other than machines. But as machines, they are something a great deal more than just simply commodities. That's really one of the issues here, right? And so with that in mind, coming back to Shankadeep's questions here, I think Jeffrey Hinton, I think, it has some points to make in relation to that these machines are not just simply next word predictors. In a certain sense, they are, but they are a great deal more than that. Right? They're not just predicting the next word. These technologies are now at the point where they can grasp concepts, not in the same way that humans do, but simply by creating these high-dimensional vector maps, by looking at the proximity of terms to each other in our own culture. They're basically just simulating us. But in simulating us, they're able to grasp a lot more than just how to predict the next word. They can understand concepts, for example, like be honest, tell the truth, right? Respond to me in a way that always tells the truth. And it'll be able to understand what you're saying, not in a way that we understand it, but well enough to be able to give you responses that are truthful. Right? And that is very different from simply next word predictor, but it's based on the same technology, just a more sophisticated version. Right? But ultimately, these are simply machines that are just highly sophisticated next word predictors, but as a result are able to capture much more semantic meaning, right? And that needs to be reckoned with. And so if you could create models, as I've done as well, just with my own, high-end consumer and hardware here that are trained on the works of Marx, for example, that it can then converse with you in a much more much better, much more effectively than ChatGPT will. It's not just a general kind of, ChatGPT can talk like Marx to some extent, but it won't give you the same, if you train it on all of its works, on all of his works, then it'll be much more, it'll have at its fingertips the actual work that it could access at a moment's notice in real time, as opposed to a blurry JPEG of the work, which it's been trained on. Nevertheless, you're not dealing with a human being. You're not dealing with Marx. You're dealing with an AI model of someone on whose works has been trained, right? And that's basically, and you're never going to get more than that. And you can't expect more than that. But it doesn't mean the end of the world, and it doesn't mean the beginning of a new world either. Right? It just means what it means. And I think there'll be lots of great use cases for this, and lots of terrible use cases for this. But I think our job is just to get clarity on what this is, and not to over mystify it, but also not to over reduce it.
Thank you. Great. So we can return to it. You've thrown into the ring this idea that it's doing more than predicting, it's grasping concepts. I think some of us, might want to challenge that, but rather than doing that directly, Alan, do you have anything to say in response to the last set of comments?
No, I think I broadly agree with Alex in the sense. I don't know, like I think we also need to, or at least something that the kind of like AI scholarship that I sometimes like coming from the humanities is the one that is not trying to say like, oh no, this is not like what AI is doing is not this thing that we humans do is not this thing either, but rather see like what these concepts, how they have to be transformed in order to understand what AI is doing. Like for example, I was just thinking like once again, this guy Hannes Bajor has this kind of like pushes against this notion that like AI, like large language models, don't create any meaning. That is just like pure statistics, and he's like more pushing the idea like of like a concept of like dumb meaning. So like the idea that there's some meaning created in a pure like differential way that is not like meaning as we comprehend it, but it is some sort of meaning nonetheless. So just to say that, yeah, as Alex said, I think it's important to not like think that I don't know, the only thing we can do is demystify, but also sort of understand or like kind of bounce or like humanistic concepts on these machines and see like uh, how they challenge them or like see how they're also. I mean, also like as this I don't know as Dennett says, like AI is this sort of like intuition pump, to kind of like bounce some of the things that we think are like inherently human to see like how we have to rethink them. But yeah, I think that's kind of my broad position.
Sure, no doubt, Susan.
Great, thanks. So over to Anna, and then Matvey after that.
Okay, thank you so much. Very interesting speeches, both. I have a comment or a question, let's say, to Alex. Following what you said about the Pasquinelli book, sorry, I didn't read it yet. So I just want to precise some things. Because so you say that Pasquinelli said that actually the artificial intelligence, it's not something that produces something new. It's just like the imitation or the mimics of the human experience or human life. I would maybe say even hyper imitation, if it's reasonable. But that made me thinking if we could actually apply the theory of simulacra here in context of the AI, like that's made by humans, better than the real one, but still something that exists only like only as something that is like practically not real, something that is just as you said, like imitation. So my question is like, do you think this is kind of like a proper kind of following of the Pasquinelli book and what you said, or that's completely unreasonable? Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to return to that? Yeah, answer that quickly.
Oh, can I respond to that quickly? Sure. Thank you. That's actually, thank you so much for that, Anna. That's really the way I've been thinking about this as well. Trying to understand their ability to not so much to grasp concepts. See, this is what I'm trying to get at there, Kirill, as well. I don't think they can grasp concepts. I don't think they have the ability to grasp concepts. We need something, they're simulating. They're doing nothing more than simulate because they're not in the real world. In the same way that they can't create a tornado, it's not going to start to rain. They can simulate a tornado, So I think something similar is happening here. They're simulating a capacity to respond to us in a way that appears that they're grasping concepts, but in a way that is actually consistent. So, and I think that's really our challenge, to be able to recognize the limits of our knowledge right now, really. And I think that's why I do think Anna is correct to think about. I mean, there is something. I mean, that kind of takes us back to Baudrillard and the idea of a simulacra, a copy without an original. And I've been trying to think about that as well. Like you can think of some of the limits of a lot of these AI models that are being broadly adopted now as being really problematic simulacra of us, and what is left out, how are we represented in these models. And I mean, whether we like it or not, if we close our eyes, they're not going to go away. People will be using them. And unless we get in there and start to actually impact things on that level, we'll be using the models that they create. And those will be simulations of us, and there'll be simulations that we've had no impact into, over, and they'll say over, and they will be incredibly limited, I think, right? And
Thanks.
yeah,
Great.
okay, so I'll end there. Yeah.
Okay, Matvey?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for to both speakers. I have a particular question to Alan about the last kind of sentence in your essay that seemed very exigent for what I've been recently engaging with and philosophy of technology of Gilbert Simondon. And I was wondering, it came really out of somewhere I did not expect, and if you could speak more about how you could or could not see a potential of kind of blending these two kind of very different kind of materialist aspect, like kind of positions together, because you know, coming back from kind of like Marxist, Hegelian, dialectical Soviet understanding of the question of technology, it's really, really hard sometimes to get through ideas that Simondon tries to propose with this kind of like internal primordial unity that I think goes much more hand in hand in this kind of like idea that you and Alex were trying to emphasize on that kind of like predicted kind of trajectory that we try to like see as unnatural, but there's some natural aspect to it. So it really seems that Simondon really tries to go on that route and like emphasize the kind of symbiosis of man and technology. And yeah, I know that there's a dissertation either written already or in the process of getting written on Simondon and AI from some researcher from the UK, but I wonder what's your kind of comment, if you can speak about that a little more.
Yeah, no, you're right. That last sentence was mostly like tongue-in-cheek, and also like to hope like some Simondonian read it and pissed them off, hopefully. Yeah, no, it's a good question, because I feel like, yeah, Simondon is very much present like in the discourse today, and to be honest, I haven't thought like this. So I only used it to kind of like refer to this idea of or how I was treating the notion of like social form, and like the social form of the machine, and like in the sense that it's kind of yeah, it's mode of existence within like a certain set of social relations. So I was kind of like riffing on this like phrase from Simondon, but it's true that like I mean, there must be some work done on this, because yeah, like I also haven't read like Simondon on the mode of existence of technical objects so deeply, but I know that he has like this whole discussion of like yeah, we have to de-alienate not only the human but also the machine. The machine is alienated, but on the other hand, he has like this idea of which from a Marxist standpoint is like probably quite lacking, because his whole like notion of like technological development like it's as if yeah, this individuation of machines it kind of has like its inherent logic, no? It's kind of like as if the machine itself is kind of like asking to be developed into some way, which is like towards like cybernetics and like concretization and all this. But as far as I know, that maybe it's not so detailed. I don't think he ever kind of like tries to see like how this directionality of like technological development intersects with the mode of production, which is there's a good paper on this. I think it's from Daniela Voss, if I remember correctly, but it's exactly about like kind of like a critique of yeah, this directionality of technology in Simondon. But yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, so we will keep going for about another 20 minutes. If you guys need to go, then that's totally fine. So yeah, if anyone, I know, yeah, us adding on the extra 30 minutes wasn't communicated to you. So if you can't stay, that's totally fine. If you can, then that's great. But those of us who can stay, yeah, we'll keep discussing this. Okay, so we've only got Alan for 10 more minutes. So let's try to, if Andy or Karina, if your question was for Alan, then please do share it now. Otherwise, we'll go to any questions that were for Alan. Yeah, so Andy, if you were specifically asking Alan something, then please do unmute. If you weren't, then
it's both.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Just to, I mean, I read both the things that were sent and listening to the talks. I think something really important is coming out of the discussion. I think 3 points. I think in both of the papers, obviously you've got a very specific object or thing you're trying to say. And what you're abstracting from in both of the papers is the most important thing about what Ilyenkov does, which is he looks at what is the nature of thought and what is the nature of labour. And I think that's the missing element, for example, in what you're saying, Alex. You're saying, well, it's not labour. That begs the question, what is labour? What is distinctive about labour? And that's the question which Ilyenkov answers. And he answers that by first explaining what's distinctive about thought. And it's then you can deal with questions like, well, what is a concept, and are concepts understood? And they're not by AI. So I think that's the sort of missing element, which is the core to Ilyenkov, which will help us with this discussion. Secondly, I mean, I think I agree with Alan that Ilyenkov probably doesn't have a systemic discussion of commodity fetishism as you see it in Capital. Maybe but that's probably true. But I think it's really important to see that Ilyenkov's answer to the question about what is thought and then what is labour is developed through his book Dialectical Logic, systemically through the history of modern philosophy, from Descartes through the German philosophical tradition to the materialist Marx and Engels. And I think you get a lot out of that, which would really help you in what you're doing, Alan, in terms of trying to understand fetishism in this context. And then finally, if I were to sort of pick out one thing you don't talk about, which is really important and isn't always mentioned, about the nature of thought and the nature of labour and how it's distinct from other kinds of thing, then I would pick out infinity. I mean, Ilyenkov starts with Spinoza's concept of substance and Spinoza's concept of thought, and then he develops it through Hegel and Marx and Engels to a concept of labour. But the crucial element of why codification and algorithms aren't about semantics is that thought is we exist as humans in an infinite universe, and knowledge is about an infinite universe, and you can't codify, systematize, formalize an infinite extent. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, it was certainly my response to Alan's essay that he's sort of more Ilyenkovian than he's suggesting. So Alan, in your framing, just a little bridge, whereas actually there are lots of resources, it seems, in what you're doing that perhaps Ilyenkov has. Yeah, I'm not sure if there was anything you wanted to respond to there, Alan. Otherwise, I'm happy to pass to Karina.
Thank you for the comment. Yeah,
Great.
a lot to think about.
Karina, was your question?
Well, yeah, it was a comment on a little bit to do with Alan, but not only. This quotation that you've got from Ilyenkov is very, in my view, is very crucial about the nature of ideality, which there hasn't really been a lot of discussion about this so far. So I think this is a crucial thing, because Ilyenkov says, quite, in my view, absolutely correctly, that ideality can only have an illusory appearance. It is an illusory thing. But to go back to Lars's point, if we're talking about the transformation of matter by social practice, which is what AI is the transformation of matter by social practice. What is it transformed? What is that matter transformed into? What is the thing? As Alex rightly says, it's a thing, it's a practice, but it's also a thing. It becomes a thing in this transformation. So it is a transformation into its own opposite of matter, into ideality, which is only illusory. I think that's the crux of it, really, in the fact that what we need, where Ilyenkov needs to be developed, is exactly on that question. And what is that ideality? And when we're talking about this power of the fetish, which everybody's spoken about very eloquently, the enormous power that this has in social relations today, that is the power of this illusory thing. And it has a huge purchase on reality, as we know. I mean, the Musk thing is just a very powerful example of it. This fear that it can instill. And again, to go back to Lars's, if the transformation is from the material into the ideal, then what is it is a separate process. Lars was asking, from the ideal to the real is another process. It's not the same process. And that's, I think, what needs to be examined. What is that reality of the ideal? What is it actually, and what is its dialectic, which is what I think Alex's point about it being a site of struggle brings in this dialectical struggle that is contained within these clash of these opposites, and the constant transformation of these opposites in daily social life. I think that the movement, the process is so vital to uncover and to show the opposites within it. And that's why I thought this book that Alex flagged up at one point is rather important, because it doesn't just look at it as a negative fetishized thing, but as a full of potential for transformation.
Thanks, Karina.
And thank you, Alan, for for drawing attention to those quotes, because they really are, I think, point to future development.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, there's clearly lots of interest in this topic, and maybe, we can have a separate session on AI from this different perspective. But yeah, just to make it really concrete there. And then, Alan, if you need to go, that's fine. But I know from your past practice, Alan, Ilyenkov himself uses this idea of an architect thinking using drawing on paper. So architect is drawing using an architectural drawing. And in some ways, it seems there's something important to say about how AI is also us kind of thinking in this material way. So in the way that large language models seem to kind of complete our thoughts, there seems to be something there that's quite important about the materialization of our thoughts. So if you do have anything to say about the ideal, or about whether idealization and materialization are separate processes, then that would be great. If you don't have time, then we can come back to this in another session.
No, I mean, I think probably Alex would have more to say about it, because this idea of like the idea is like this processual character of the ideal. I kind of took it from a quote of his, and it made a lot of sense to me, because it's and I don't know about whether materialization and idealization are like separate processes, or is it just like an analytical distinction? Is it like I don't know, a succession? I don't know. I guess like you need to like have like, I don't know, sharper, I don't know, philosophy of mind tools to kind of like discuss this. I don't know, perhaps. But yeah, also like in our email exchange, I think I don't know if there's a lot of like work like that, or people like trying to overlap Ilyenkov with historical epistemology, or like people like Peter Damerow or like Jürgen Wren, who like precisely discuss in more like yeah, like developmental psychology, or archaeology, archaeological terms, this process of what they call like reflexive abstraction, or like how through the use of tools, like kind of cognitive structures evolve. So I feel like there's as I said, I don't know if there's people like putting these two kind of like lines together, but I feel like they have a lot of common to like understand this kind of notion of the ideal and the idealization and materialization as kind of a recursive process. And I also like in the paper, a point that I left toward the end is kind of, because in a point, like I also drew a quote from Ilyenkov where he describes this process as kind of like spiral-like. It's kind of like a spiral, and I took that to understand of like how this process, this like kind of recursive process of like idealization and materialization can sort of like at some point acquire like a sort of path dependency, or like it can become like kind of like seemingly, I mean, you can see this as maybe as fetishism, maybe it doesn't have to be seen as fetishism, but I kind of understood it as saying that there's a process where it becomes like more rigid, you know, and that it's not like material culture seems to be kind of like inherently endowed with these idealized meanings, and it just kind of acquires like maybe it's just how like approach to understand like the notion of like second nature, perhaps, I don't know. But I think like it's also important to understand like this like the way in which this spiral process can derail towards yeah, reification, fetishism, which, as I said, I think is not something that may you find in Ilyenkov, or even like in also like in historical epistemology, but it's something that you need, I don't know, other tools perhaps.
Yeah, to answer your question, no, there isn't anyone writing on how people like Damerow and Wren, who point at historical cases to say, here is algebra emerging at this point in history. That would be an interesting project. There's only Martin Persch who's combining anthropological studies with Ilyenkov. Karina wanted to just quickly return on something there. If you need to go out, and that's fine. Otherwise, we'll come to Ralph afterwards.
Yeah, it was just again on this. Alan mentioned response to Lars's question, the materialization and the idealization as recursive processes. But I think perhaps it would help to go back to Alex's point about the algorithmic modeling and AI are not just social processes; they are also things in themselves. They have their own logic and their own development. As the point was made that it existed a long time before capitalism, which is what this book by Dennis Tenen, and also I think Alex mentioned another source. It existed a long time before capitalism. In other words, this technological development has its own logic, its own development, and it's a thing in itself, and it's full of contradictions. That's the real issue. So when there's a transformation of the ideal to the material, and vice versa, in that process, there is a real transformation. It's not just gliding from one to the next. There can be, or there are qualitative leaps, and the development of AI at this present time from 2022 to 2025, what we've seen is leaps, not just straight line evolution.
Thanks. Yeah, and there is a newly translated essay by Ilyenkov and comrades about how neural networks can't deal with contradiction properly. They assume the language is this sort of finished, complete system of relations. Okay, Ralph, and then final comment, and then we'll close.
Yes, I believe that my question has been addressed as best as it could about improving the theory of fetishism in Ilyenkov, and perhaps Ilyenkov's theory of abstraction. I mean, I have positive things to say about both the speakers and Ilyenkov himself. the things that were puzzling me was this question of, well, how do we have to develop Ilyenkov further to deal with fetishism? And I would also say perhaps the nature and history of abstraction overall. In terms of Ilyenkov's essay from the 1960s, several people on the left in critical theory and Marxists were dealing with this issue, which of course they called cybernetics. And they all had interesting things to say about it. Adorno, Habermas, Lefebvre, Ilyenkov. Ilyenkov is unique in certain ways, and I think most of it holds up and is very current. Although this question of whether AI can deal with contradictions is a point which I think might be a little weak, depending on how we interpret what that's supposed to mean. I'll explain that in a second, but I do have a question for Alex, which I think he brought up many of the things that interest me the most. But what I'm puzzled by is that from what I understand, with the robot, with Blue and everything, and everything else, that he's not only a consumer of AI as we are, but as a producer as well. And yet he seems to not really understand how it's operating, from what he said. In other words, if it can process semantic information, even though it doesn't know what it's doing, I would think that Alex would understand something about how it processes and simulates semantic concepts. And, that's what's kind of missing for me here, because that is sort of a key to understanding how it works. In other words, rather than being mystified by its assumption of human personality and conversational style and the way that it flatters its users, unless you tell it not to flatter you, which you could do with ChatGPT, we still need an understanding of sort of how this app operates, because it actually can produce rather convincing feedback. When I first used it, when it first appeared for the public, it was ridiculous. It was even dumber than people are, which is hard to imagine. But it seems to be much more sophisticated now. And I think to demystify it, we have to understand better how it works. The other thing about Ilyenkov, about contradiction, is that you can converse with these things about contradiction. Now, its internal logic is one thing, but the large language models can and do discuss the concept of contradiction, because they also can discuss logic, mathematics, language, and a number of other things. So exactly what it's doing when it discusses contradiction in a seemingly intelligent fashion is something I suppose we have to look into its mechanism, because, in the 60s, AI was not even developed very much at all. And so that little what I would consider that ambiguous statement by Ilyenkov is something that should be looked at, because I guess he was thinking just in terms of logic, because logic presumably can't deal with contradiction, therefore neither can cybernetics. But as I say, this is sort of the hazy area that I would like better understanding of. Is exactly what is it doing when it seems to provide not only responses, but even pursuing the logical consequences of the conversations that you have with it.
Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, I don't think Ilyenkov's saying that that AI can't discuss contradiction. I think he's saying that a neural network which deals with weights, so you have this prior state where it's worked out the weights of everything, that can't deal with contradiction, which Andy's connecting with ideas of infinity. But I think we need a separate session to come back to that. I'm on team Ilyenkov here, so maybe we need a bit longer to discuss that. I want to finish giving Alex time to return to any of these comments, so not just Ralph, but maybe starting with Ralph and then some of the earlier comments as well, and then it'll be back to Karina to close.
Thank you so much, folks. Wow, really great discussion. I wish we had a bit more time. I would love to really spend some time answering. Andrew Brown brought up some great points. I really want to dig into those, and Karina and Ralph as well now. And so it's hard to do. How to tie these things together in a quick and elegant way. I would also maybe I'll go back to Andrew's first point. And I think that does tie in with Ralph's comments on contradiction. These models, this technology is fundamentally in a different world than us. That's really what's missing here for Ilyenkov. So his work on cybernetics that Ralph just discussed in the 60s, that essay, is very much an application of his conception of thinking in general. Right? You can deduce what he wrote there without that text. You just apply his basic ideas to AI, and you can see what's going on here. That these are the way they learn is not how humans learn. We learn by overcoming real world contradictions. We have experiences, which is what my poor attempt at the beginning was to stage an experience for which our categories are inadequate to create a real world contradictions in order to move us into a space of thinking. That never happens with AI models. They're not trained in that way. They are trained in their so-called training. They use the same language, right? We call it training. We call them intelligent. But all of these words, they belie how different these things really are from us. That they live in another world completely from us. And this is where the contradiction moment is important. Like Kirill was saying, they can talk about contradictions all day long. They don't experience contradictions, at least not yet. I mean, there is some really interesting work right now that's being done in machine learning that tries to do that, where two of them are put against each other, for example, in an adversarial situation, where they learn from that kind of actual real world situation. But the way they're typically trained is not like that. They're firmly within the world of formal logic. There's no dialectical logic happening here at all. They're just trained through a very, very different process. And I don't have a degree in this, Ralph. I don't understand how these things work to the same extent. I don't understand how planes work, but I fly. I don't understand how my car works, but I know I need to put gas in. My understanding of this thing is adequate enough to make it work. But how it actually works, I'm as mystified as everyone else, except for the fact that I have just at least maybe a basic understanding of these neural networks just from a little bit of research that I've been doing over the last couple of years. Right? But I'm not on the level of any kind of expert on these, but enough to know, just like when I'm flying an airplane, the airplane isn't mimicking a bird. I don't know how the airplane works, but I'm pretty clear it's not trying to mimic a bird, right? That's kind of here. I know this thing is not mimicking a human. Like I understand enough about how this thing works that it's completely different, just like a plane is completely different from a bird. Something along those lines, right? That the whole question of Ilyenkov and fetishism, I've been trying to avoid that because we should do a whole session on this. Like, I mean, that's a really fascinating topic, and like, I just want to say something because I feel like if I don't, we'll leave this discussion with the sense that yeah, he didn't really adequately discuss fetishism and his concept is too broad, so something along those lines. And that might be true. And I don't want to derail the whole conversation from AI onto that. But I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, he's not just talking about capitalism. And remember where he's writing. We need to situate his work within his context. There's a big debate about alienation within the Soviet Union. Does alienation continue after the overthrow of the bourgeoisie? Does it continue within the socialist period? Does it continue subsequently? Is there a moment where there's no longer alienation? How do you even theorize that? Right. So in his work, it's true. It kind of gives you the sense that he's not really specifically talking about commodity fetishism. He's talking about fetishism more broadly. And that might be, I mean, that is true. The question I think I would want to pose is why is he doing that? Right? What does it have to do with the context in which he was writing? What does it have to do with the debates around the persistence of alienation in communist society? Right? Those are all issues that I think need to be addressed before we start to make big claims like that. Right? At the very least, I think. right? And this, I think, brings us back to Karina's point. Is, I mean, the main thing here is, where's the moment in all of this idealization and materialization in life where we actually intervene, or we can intervene, so that we're not just sitting here trying to figure out some sort of a perfect machine, but to rather understand a world in which we live that has forces in which we actually also move. We don't create it as we like. You know, we labor under the weight of past generations and whatnot, as Marx told us, but we do have some agency within what we have inherited, right? And our task is to figure out what that is and how to be most effective, right? And so I think Karina's right to keep bringing us back to that. You know, how is this a site of struggle? Where does agency fit in? Where do the contradictions fit in the real world? How can things change, right? And that's why I think ultimately we need to get back to the real world and looking at these things in terms of policy. Right. So like my own current research has been focusing lately on looking at the development of AI in higher education, the possibility of implementing local AI models in higher education. There are very few organizations big enough that can do this kind of work, to host their own models. It's like what I'm doing here. I'm just using a high-end computer. But you know, to actually do this properly, you need the kind of resources these few organizations have that monopolize AI. It's difficult to compete with them. You need states, you need major institutions like multiple universities. You need something on a major infrastructural level. All right, so implementing something like that would be fantastic. You know, if more and more universities actually took that on seriously. Right? This is a major problem in education, as many of you are aware, right? How to deal with that, how to move from banning it to actually trying to perhaps create our own types of AI that are more useful than just, you know, the way they currently are. Something, you know, in that kind of direction. You know, as just one idea. There are many, many others, right? But I really think that's where we need to be moving, is to how do we actually challenge this in the real world. Ultimately, otherwise we're just talking about just ideas, right? So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, folks. I mean, I'd love to chat more, especially about the theoretical stuff. And you know, if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to connect one-on-one. Folks want to send me an email as well. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your time and for the additional time that you've generously given us. Clearly, it was, as you say, not nearly enough. So we absolutely will do an additional session. Yeah, I'm very interested in this topic from a different angle of trying to design technology and thinking about what are the kind of design norms here. So I'm really interested in what you've said tonight from that point of view. So yeah, I'm grateful for all the contributions and for everyone's questions.